Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Trellis's 2021 Orange Shirt Day Series Session 2. Thank you for taking time to join us. My name is Christy, and I'll be your host for this evening. As a quick note, I want you to notice that we have done smudge as per protocol to start us off in a good way. I would also like to invite us to take a moment of silence to observe and honor and acknowledge our residential school survivors and those that did not come home. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and I look forward to having a great conversation with everybody. First, I'd like to also acknowledge our territory that we stand in. We're in the Blackfoot Confederacy. This is the traditional ancestral territory of the Blackfoot people. This includes the Siksika, the North and South Piikani, the Kainai Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina and the I'ehei Nakota, which include the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. This is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I want to acknowledge all those that call Calgary and Mohkinstsis home. Thank you for being here today. Thank you so much to my panels for being here today as well, my panelists. Thank you for taking time today. I also want to talk a little bit about the importance of Orange Shirt Day. So you will see many of us with our masks on. As for those of you at home, we are observing protocol for COVID safety. So we do have our masks on. Everyone has been double vaccinated, and we have ensured that we are safely distanced apart to enjoy this afternoon together. As we go through today, Orange Shirt Day is an important day. As a survivor of a residential school attendee, the importance of taking time to acknowledge where we are here in our history and the importance of reconciliation is why we're here. Thank you so much for tuning in this afternoon, and hopefully we get to have some great conversation and great learnings together. I want to thank our sponsors for yesterday and for today: TC Energy, Imperial Oil, Mission Wealth Advisors Raymond James, Horizon Housing, Calgary Foundation, and ARC Resources. Thank you very much for participating and supporting our events over the last 2 days. Much appreciated. So today's about conversation. This is where we're going to ask the audience to get involved, so you will have some stuff coming up with you as well. We want you to ask your questions. Don't be shy. We do have a few people in-house here, so as well, to our people in person, ask away. It's about having a dialogue, some conversation, some learning today. This year's orange shirt was designed by a young lady named Shane Homey. Shane comes from Treaty 8. She's a jingle dress dancer and in high school. She's looking forward to being a part of today's event. And so we have a nice video from Shane, and we hope that we can see that from our home audience and see why she designed this year's shirt.
Hello, everybody. First and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge the Treaty 8 land that we are on today and continue to live off of. For those who do not know who I am, I'm this year's winner for the Orange Shirt Design Competition. See, this is my design right here. I was very surprised when Phyllis chose my design, and I was very honored as well. The decision for me to enter this competition and my main inspiration is my mushroom Frank Daniels. He attended residential school in his youth and later fought for our freedom in the Vietnam War. He is someone I look up to very much and is an inspiration to me daily. It breaks my heart to think that he and thousands of other Indigenous children had to go through all that pain and suffering, which is why I created my design in hopes to spread awareness about this occurrence and to ensure that this doesn't happen again. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak on this matter. And lastly, I'd like to thank Phyllis for creating the Orange Shirt Day movement. Without her, none of this would have happened. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Shane, for participating in this year's event. Thank you so much for contributing to that. Best of luck as you pursue your educational dreams, and thank you again for being a part of this. Now is the great time where I get to introduce our panelists that have joined us today. And so thank you again, each of you, for joining in today's conversation and taking time away from your own families and your communities for being here. So I'm going to start to my side here. So James, I have you up first to introduce. I have James Guthrie. He works for Imperial for the last 11 years, where he's currently the water lead for policy and advocacy in the Corporate and Commercial Development Division. During his professional career, he has worked in the environmental consultation, power generation, mining, and the oil and gas sectors. He has a Master's of Science from the University of Calgary, concentrating on the areas, and I'm sorry if I'm going to butcher this, James, hydrology and hydrometeorology. And he's oh, good, okay. You're a husband and a proud dad of 2 amazing, very busy children, and you love to get away to the mountains. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Wonderful. Next to James, I have Elder Jackie Bromley. Okay, Jackie. Okay. Jackie comes from the Kainai Nation, is in southern Alberta, from the Blackfoot Confederacy. Jackie was raised by her grandparents in a very traditional manner in which she is very grateful for. She has worked for over 30 years to empower our Indigenous people and our populations. Her contributions have helped lead to the development of Treaty 7 housing, and she currently works at Awutan's Healing Lodge. She sits in the Provincial Patient and Family Advisory Council for Alberta Health Services, and in 2017, she was honored with the Arthur R. Smith Award for her tireless efforts in working with our community around housing and leadership. Welcome, Jackie. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And next to Jackie, I have Rochelle Bear Shinbone. You're from the Blood Tribe, Kainai Nation, the proud granddaughter of Chief Jim Shot Both Sides, the last hereditary chief and the first elected chief of the Blood Reserve. You're also descended from Chief Red Crow, one of the signatories for Treaty 7. You're a proud mom to a teenage daughter, and you're also a proud sister, an auntie, a daughter, and a relation to many. Rochelle believes in the strong importance of reclaiming Indigenous language, and you're learning Blackfoot, and has been participating in our Trellis Sustainable Families program since 2018. Welcome, Rochelle. Thank you. Beside Rochelle, we have Paige Yellowhorn. Jalaine, or Paige Yellowhorn, is 31 and a mother of 3. You're from the Piikani and the Blood Tribe. From the Blackfoot Confederacy, your Blackfoot name is Mastaki, Crow woman, and you're a family strategist currently with Trellis, but you will be leaving us this week to move back down to Lethbridge to do some fantastic work down there with the community. And Paige wants to send a very heartfelt and special thank you to the Trellis organization and the staff, that she's so grateful to be part of the Trellis as part of her journey. She commends and appreciates their commitment to incorporating Indigenous history, impacts, and ways of knowing into our work and our hearts. So thank you so much to Trellis for all your knowledge and teachings. Thank you, Paige. Next to Paige, I have a good friend, Janet Naklia, from Alberta Recreation and Parks Association. Janet is a non-Indigenous ally who resides here in the Treaty 7 area. She's the director for people and programs for ARPA, and you completed your University of Alberta's Indigenous Sports and Recreation Graduate Certificate program. And for the past 4 years, she has been one of our collaborators in hosting a culture camp for Indigenous youth and elders. Welcome, so good to see you. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for participating and joining us again this afternoon. The day and the theme around today is around kinship and care. So while we all come from our families and our communities and our sense of identity, that's an important piece when we look at kinship. Orange Shirt Day really disrupted a lot of what our residential school impacts did around family and care and our sense of community, as we all have learned and we're coming to know. Today's conversation is going to circulate around what kinship and care is and how do we bring that into all of our aspects of daily life. What does that look like outside the door when we walk in? What does that look like inside of our workplaces? How do we incorporate that into who we are and what we do every single day? The reality is we're all human beings. We're people-based. And so how do we bring in that sense of care and love and kindness into all areas of what we do? For those that are joining us from home, we also have some interaction for you as well. We have some polls that will be popping up throughout the conversation of the day, so feel free to add to the conversation. These polls will help contribute to conversation for our panelists, but also let us get to know a little bit about you and the information that you have. So for our panelists that are with us this afternoon, I want this to be a free-flowing conversation. I don't want to feel very pressured to answer questions if you're not comfortable. So while there will be questions posed to the panel, I also want you to feel comfortable in answering what you want to answer to and what you feel safe in answering. And so while I will ask a question, not everyone needs to answer, or you can take a moment and pause and reflect on that if we need to. Those at home, make sure you get your questions in. We have some of our staff monitoring that for us. So with that, I'm going to pose the first question to our panelists. From your lens, how do you define care and parenting? And so I open up the floor if someone would like to provide a response.
If you can hear me, I'll start off. Well, from my perspective, I view care and parenting as a form of conditional love. The Creator trusted me in conceiving my 4 children. And it's my responsibility to care and support them while I am on this earth. Parenting is a selfless act that never ends. And I always believe that as long as you show your children love, respect, kindness, and honor them in a way that the Creator made them, I believe that I am being the best parent that I can be. That's my answer to that question.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add to the conversation?
Well, I think Jackie covered it quite well. The only thing that I would add from my side when I think of care and parenting really is you're there to protect your children. You also want to teach them to protect themselves. And from my point of view, I also want them to kind of be a better version of myself. So I want to find that time and opportunity to improve on so that they can add value and help others.
Thank you. That's an interesting, I think, piece of when we look at parenting and care. When we really talk about, you'll often hear the word Indigenous paradigm or worldview, and you'll have non-Indigenous paradigm or worldview. Is there actually a difference between those two things? Or are there, and if there is, what does that look like when we think of kinship or care? Is there a difference between those two things?
I think for myself, as a parent, I know that I'm going to become my children's voice of reason, because growing up, as I made choices, I would hear my grandmother in the background, and I'm like, okay, well, I need to help my kids, become their voice of reason. So I feel like the care and, being a parent is, you are literally becoming a part of that child. You are them. That child is you. If the child is not biologically yours, then you're still responsible to help them build a strong and healthy identity as caregivers, as the older people, guiding the children in the universe. It's our responsibility to guide them through the universe, to help them see things, in a good way. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. I'm like, yeah. But yeah, so I think definitely to help them build that strong identity as Indigenous children, even if you're non-Indigenous.
Yeah. So when we look at some of our traditional ways of raising children, I think that the adage of saying, of course, there's impacts to how traditional parent rearing came to be and got disrupted by residential schools. But is there a way, given the focus of today, like how deep did that go? Like we all say it's been impacted, but are there ways of taking what has been impacted and rebuilding that? Like what does that actually look like in today's environment? For many of us, that's, as Indigenous people, we're walking in two worlds. We're having to balance finding our traditional way of knowing and reclaiming what that looks like, but then we're also having to look at what this looks like from a, working on a Western standpoint. That's our, as Elder Reg would say, that's our default system right now, right? And so when we look at how these impacts came to be, what does it look like to actually try and reclaim and rebuild traditional practices of parenting into what we call society today? And are there ways that we can do that? And is that even possible at this moment? So maybe another part of that would be, so for many of us that work with children and families and youth and families, as we look as, Indigenous people, if we're thinking about how do we support our young people and being the best people that they can be for the next generations, how do we build and encourage our young people to reclaim culture? What does that look like? Particularly for many of us that live in urban centers, that sometimes can be much more difficult for us to be in a space where we're sometimes distanced from our home communities. A prime example would be myself. I am from the Secwepemc Nation in British Columbia, quite a bit further distance from where I currently reside in Calgary, a good 12, 13-hour drive. And so it's not as easy for me to be able to just be in my space of my people and have it at a regular, consistent manner. So when I look at how do I embed traditional and caregiving practices into my work here, what are those barriers and how do I incorporate that when I am so removed? Like what does that look like as we shift into this space? Technology for sure might play a good role in that, but is that enough? And I'd also invite like any of our non-Indigenous allies that are sitting here, I mean, as parents or providers or those that work with programs as well, the importance of like, even as we work in these Western construct systems, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing in supporting us as Indigenous people to reclaim some of our traditional parenting practices?
I think that the government, well, I guess history has impacted our culture and our way of life by almost completely erasing it. And I think how we begin to bring that back and bring them to our youth and to our children is actually by going back and really looking into what has been taken from us. So I guess coming from a personal experience, growing up, just my identity as an Indigenous person was not positive. It was negative. I came from a small town. I was really, there was a lot of racism that happened, and identified with being an Indian. That's what I grew up identifying myself as an Indian. And then you hear negative stereotypes like drunk Indian, and then you see, your family and your community suffering from alcoholism, and you think it's true, and I think that's definitely, you don't know who you are anymore. You don't have an identity as an Indigenous person. There's no pride. There's shame. And I think right now, as individuals, we definitely can help contribute to building that pride as Indigenous people. And that comes from learning the history and the culture of what happened, spreading awareness, and really, participating in the ways and helping people reclaim their spirituality, because that's what it is. We've lost our spirituality throughout history, and it's our inherited right to have this spirituality as Indigenous people, but there's so many of us that are lost and do not know who we are, where we come from. And I think the biggest piece is going back to the beginning.
Very well. If I may add to that, as a residential school survivor, You know, I feel that it's very important that we tell our stories. It's so important for history. And Canada needs a vision forward and a balanced understanding of our past in order to get to, I have to say this, to the true reconciliation with Indigenous people. You know, when I was young, when I went to residential school, when we were separated from our parents, I was sent to the residential school not to acquire an education, and but primarily to break our culture and identity. And, you know, that's something that I have a struggle with is, like thinking about all this. Yeah, that's what I was just gonna add on to this.
Yeah, thank you.
These are tough questions.
Question.
So I can add to that. So I'm Janet. I also should acknowledge I'm not Indigenous, but I do have Indigenous names that were given to me by elders. So Nia Muskiki Kihiuasquale, that means Medicine Eagle Woman. It's a name that was given me by the late Daryl Brass and his wife Linda Brass. And I'm also honored to have a Blackfoot name. Amskapitaki, Nestawanago Amskapitaki, which means Southern Eagle Woman. And that name was given to me by John Chief Moon Sr. And I think it's really important to acknowledge, like Elder Jackie was just saying, to acknowledge like who you are. So as a non-Indigenous ally, it is an interesting place to walk too. So I do also work a lot with Dr. Reg Croshoe and his wife, Rose. And there is always that challenge about what do we do as allies when these difficult questions come up. And if you know me, I like to talk a lot, but I don't have kids, and I don't work with kids, so I was quiet for 2 seconds there, so that will stop now. But one thing that I will say, because I work a lot with elders like Jackie, is the importance of hearing. So when Jackie was saying that thing about the truth, and we always talk about what's the truth and what's the stories, we say, oh, listen to your elders, listen to community. But then, the challenge I would offer is actually you have to hear. And part of being the white privilege that I know I have is that confidence that, oh, I know the answer or the system I'm in is dominant. So you have to suspend the idea that the belief that you have the solutions to things and actually hear, which is more than like listening. So I will sit with elders and just sit and just listen to the truths that are being told. And I think that is a privilege that I have in the work that I do. But when you talk about what is the truth, people don't want to hear what the truth is. And I think part of the challenges we have now, it's now a national holiday. The community has known about all of these atrocities and these graves for a very long time. So it's not a holiday to them. It's a holiday, but it's not like, we're not on the beach in Maui. So I think it's important, I've found as an ally anyways in this work, is the challenge of actually hearing the truth and then actioning it in a way that's respectful and not your own solution. So I say that would be my contribution without having kids or being a parent. Christy.
Good job.
So why am I here? People are wondering, why is she here? I don't know, but it's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. We're all awesome.
Janet's got lots of knowledge. You keep going.
Random stuff. It's going to be good.
But I think
I could jump in as a non-Indigenous parent.
There you go.
there you go.
And I think what I would add, we need to learn from our kids. I don't know, my kids are babies. They just play with other kids. And as they grow older, if it's my personal bias or my societal bias, I gotta be cautious I don't pass that on to my kids. Because you can change how they react when you're put in these learning situations. For me, the key thing that I want to do is I want to, first of all, listen to the truth that's going to be shared with me by others who have dealt with this residential school. And I want to learn from that, because that's the key thing when you said, you don't hear them. If you're listening to talk, it's not helpful. But if you're listening to learn, that's what we need to do. And then I need to share what I've been told, and then make sure that I can pass it on to my kids so they can also learn. So that's how I would approach as a non-Indigenous parent. That's one start that I can do.
Which I think is a great question that I think we pose overall is, that's often the big hanging fruit kind of question is like, what does reclamation mean? What does reconciliation actually mean? And as part of the audience, and there'll be a poll popping up shortly asking you, like, how do you define reconciliation? Because that's always the big question that's always out there. It's like, let's get to reconciliation. Let's get through this truth. I've heard stuff. Moving on. Tell me, how do I get to the end point of this? And I think that's the bigger piece of, have we actually really heard what we need to do? I think that's always a different crux that even my sister is in a helping profession and works with young people, and even the conversation camp and the young persons, so there's lots of Indigenous and non-Indigenous kiddos in their service, and that came up around today of some of the young Indigenous people that were in that group were like saying, of course, like I feel very ashamed growing up of who I was. That resonated quite deeply, Paige, of like I was ashamed to be Indigenous, and then we had other people in that young group that was saying like, this is not that wasn't me. I wasn't there. That wasn't my generation that did that. So why should I care? And so, I mean, both of those statements speak to why reconciliation is important, right? Both of them hold a space where when we talk about how does this affect society, it's those pieces as whether we're parents, we're caregivers, when we're talking about kinship, whether we're a parent or not, or it's those pieces of when we look at family ties from our Indigenous worldview, and I think from many other cultures that are around the world, family is just always not the nuclear aspect. And so how do I be a good relation to others around me is the important piece when we look at like, how can people really be a part of this? And I think that does speak to like, what role does society have in being a good kin? Like, how do we actually bring that into what we do? And that's really kind of what I'm really curious to say is like, how might society step up our efforts in being good kin? Is it sitting in space like this today? Is it bringing it to the dinner table when we go home tonight and have a meal? Is it out in other groups that we may or may not feel comfortable sitting in? Because I don't know for how many people like in our panel right now, or even in the room, how many of us have been confronted in situations where we've had to stand up for others in spaces? And have we? Right? And so when we want to listen to what's happening, especially today, right? When we walk around and we see people out and about today, like, are we going to have the voice to support that space of reclamation and reconciliation in our journey today? And so not just on today, like, how can society keep that going forward? And many of us sit in programs, work in programs, volunteer in programs, we work in jobs. So I think my question would be to maybe our panelists, or even you at home, is what areas can you see, or what areas are you doing right now in your workplace or as a parent or as a community member to bring truth into space? What does that look like? I know for like an example, Janet, not to put you on the spot, but even as a non-Indigenous ally, I mean, our collaboration with Culture Camp, right? That would be to me an excellent segue or an example of how we create space for that to occur, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I've found, and I'll talk about Culture Camp in a second, is again, like we do work a lot with the Crow Shoes, and Reg always says, you know, Natuaki Pitakaki, if you want to do something, you make relatives. And it's interesting too, because a lot of people, when they think about their job, it's something in a mainstream way that's kind of 9 to 5. So I work, this is me working. That's what I look like when I work.
It's true. She does.
Exactly, like everybody. But I have found, and then you cut yourself, like you're 9 o'clock, you're done, you go home. Or you are home already because it's COVID. But what I've found, in fact, that it's that, like I don't have really a strong connection, or a strong disconnect between my personal life, my work, and what I do with like Indigenous friends and relatives and elders and those that I work with. So, you know, you might go to a community event before COVID. You might help an elder do some errands. You could be on a virtual, I was in a virtual teaching with an elder yesterday. And so the key part is to be present and to be involved in everyone's lives like you would as if they were family. So you do things for someone like you might do for your own mom. Because it's that key relational piece. So what I find eventually is that all the people that I work with, I absolutely adore and love in their family. And then sometimes work happens. Along the way, maybe we do a strategic plan or we do this thing, but it's with all these people that I love, and it could be at any time of the day or at any time of the year or whenever that is. And I think that level of caring, as you're saying, Christy, is what actually generally comes through and what actually gets the work done. So if you're talking about change, it can't happen from 9 to 5 with your work email. Like that change is never gonna happen. So what we have done with Trellis is we came together with a group of elders under Reg Crowshoe, the Elders Knowledge Circle. So we work with 25 elders, of who Elder Jackie is one of them. And it was this identification that there was a lot of need for capacity building within the elders first because of intergenerational trauma, and then how that passed down to youth. Because if your elders aren't strong, and then COVID hit and elders pass away, you're losing libraries, like literally libraries once they pass away. So we did partner with Trellis and Muscanawa to create an elders camp, elders and youth capacity camp that happened on the land. And you're saying about that creation of space too, and the creation of named and spirituality. Like we do things like naming for kids, and for people who don't have an identity, once you see them get their spiritual name or these things happen, it's like a whole new kid is sitting in front of you. But so is a whole new elder because of that connection of that knowledge transfer that you don't have you need a safe and ethical space to do it, and it can't be tokenism, it has to be genuine. So the ability to create that space, but we could have done that work unless Christy and I were really good friends. Like if she didn't trust me, because does she even trust me? I don't know. She's saying it because she's on camera. But you know, without that connection, that work wouldn't even started. So people will often come to me and say, okay, can you have a contact? Do you have an elder? I'm like, why would I give them your name? Do I trust you? Do I know that you're going to treat them in the way that they deserve to be treated, whether it's a partner or an elder? So no, I'm not giving you a name. You have to work for that name. It's an honor and a privilege to have that access. So I think that is something that I learned from, and I think that out of that genuine relationship building where you actually care about the people you work with and not the outcome is, I think, a key to how that change and that reconciliation, and that's what reconciliation is key to.
Yeah, 100%. That relationship building we keep talking about, the importance of that connection of not just a transactional.
Exactly.
We often talk about the extraction piece.
Yeah,
of
mining of knowledge or mining of information.
100%. So, I mean, I think that's when people often say, like, what does this mean? It's like, well, relationships take a lot of time. We're all in relationships of some sort. Family, you know, everyone's like, oh, family, we love family. But, you know, it's like family. But it's that piece of that you have to work at things in order to get that. And sense of family is, again, much broader. And that truly, my grandma and grandpa on my mother's side, who are non-Indigenous, my grandma and grandpa used to always say, like, the community is your family. Like, that's where you feel safe. But, you know, going back to a small town where they ended up settling in, and I grew up in, literally, like, it was only like maybe 300 people total, and everyone knew everybody, and everyone felt that sense of camaraderie and community. And yes, there'd be arguments and whatnot, but it was that sense of connection and constantly building relationships. So whether grandma and grandpa went to church or they went to, you know, community barbecue, it was that sense of everybody went to contribute and build relations. And so going home now, while I've been out of that community for many years, and it's much more bigger than it was, there's still that connection because people can place me No different when I go back home. You know, they're like, oh, you're so-and-so's granddaughter, or you're so-and-so's kid. I remember when you were this big and now you're this big. And, you know, it's no different than going back home to my traditional territory. It's that sense of connection and relationship. It constantly takes effort. And while I'm 12 hours away, I'm still constantly having to maintain my connection with that community. And so when we look at the question of like, how might society support that? Like, what can society do around that? It's that consistency.
And I'll add, then stop talking, I promise, is that too, the other thing I say when people kind of come to me, I'm like, it's like dating. If you think of your wife or your husband or your partner, like, did you run to the altar the first time you met them? They'd probably run screaming away from you. And yet often in relationships with community, we often feel like we should get to that marriage right at the beginning. And why? So it is like, if you're courting someone or creating a relationship in a good way, like, don't march them to the altar, because they will run away screaming. And it is a slow, genuine, thoughtful process that has to happen with relationship buildings.
100%. And I snicker to myself because we had to date our elders council.
Exactly.
At Trellis. So
Yeah.
yes, same thing is we okay, now it's out. We joke about that. So I know we're all going to joke about that. But when our Knowledge Keepers Council, when we started with that, it was like, okay, relations, deep relationships with connections to people in the community that I had and others had, recommending people to come sit there. And it was like, okay, down to business. Let's get right to the task. And they were like, yeah, time out. I don't know you. I know Christy, but I don't know you, and I don't know you. So we're going to back it up here, and we're going to date, essentially. And, you know, so we dated for about, you know, just over a year and a bit. And it's, you know, and while we joke about that, it actually is true, right? We really were building those relationships and taking time out to just be in space, to talk, to converse, to be a part of just things like, here's the agenda, like out it goes, because that's actually, this may help set the tone, but this is not what builds a relationship. It's about this, right? And so that's the important piece when we look at what does that look like and how do we define reconciliation. It's going to be different for people, but the basis point, what I'm hearing is around that relationship piece. And I know we can keep saying that and we keep harping on it, but it's actually true in anything that we do. I don't know if anyone else has anything else. Oh, Paige, yes, go ahead.
I think, well, I wanted to share a quote. So I have a quote that I basically live my life by, and it's that the sharing of that as Indigenous people, that we give gifts, we give food, you know, we give. That's a part of what we do. It's a part of our life. But the biggest thing that we could give is ourselves through our experiences and our stories. And that's not the direct quote, obviously, but it comes from Blackfoot Ways of Knowing by Betty Bastine, who is actually my grandmother. I don't know if she's watching. I told her to, but yeah. So I find that, you know, for me, how residential schools really disrupted family dynamics within Indigenous families. And when I look back on residential schools and doing the work that I do, it's the impacts that residential schools have made. And I guess right now, just exploring and researching and trying to break the cycles of intergenerational trauma, trying to find ways, but a lot of that is sharing my own personal experiences with people. And that's with the people that I work with, clients, coworkers. Like I'm very open with my experiences, because I know when I share each experience that I'm giving a gift. And I think when we talk about, you know, like stories and sharing and, you know, just kind of following upon everything that everybody else said as well, you know, stories have a very significant meaning in Indigenous culture. And we told stories. That's how we kept things going. That's how we kept things alive, you know. And I feel like our stories have gotten very sad, and they're not happy anymore. And now we're sharing nothing but sad stories all the time. And I think it's really it's really great that we're spreading this awareness, but there's just so much beauty to us that we're missing, and we definitely need to be spreading more awareness to this beauty. And yeah, like I remember just randomly watching something, and it said that stories are actually that it's how people remember things. That's one of the research has proven that is how people remember things is through stories. So I feel like through us telling our stories and giving permission for you to tell stories, that's breaking barriers, and that's creating reconciliation. And I'm speaking my truth from something that has happened to my grandparents and their grandparents. And I think it's all about truth, but I think it's definitely about spreading those stories, keeping those stories, respecting those stories, and hopefully one day changing the perspective on them and having a positive outlook on everything.
That's such a great point, Paige, that, I mean, today is very much, obviously, it is about truth-telling and that movement piece. But there is so much more to the Indigenous worldview and sharing. And so how do we, that's a great question. I don't know if anyone on the panel has thoughts around that, but how do we incorporate that? It's not about forgetting or brushing aside our shared history or the truth that's there, but how do we then create that space for those other stories to come forward? What would that look like in other environments other than many of us work in the human services sector? Does that have a place in other sectors? And what could that look like? Like, how do we bring that forward in those spaces?
I think through education. Through education and through listening, giving each and everyone a chance to talk and tell their stories and how it's affected, like it has affected several people, like, you know, throughout the world, like residential school, it had an impact on, I believe, each and every reserve. And it's different for everybody. So and it all depends on that individual. If they're strong enough to fight that and overcome their experiences and move on. And some aren't. You see it now. You see it now on the reserve. There's like a lot of like alcohols, addictions, like alcohol, drugs. There's all sorts of addictions. And I think if we just educate, like through education, and be willing to listen to each and every, you know, everybody's story, like even if they're an old drunk on the side of the road, that if you take the time and listen to that individual, like he's hurting and he's like years trying to find himself, but there's no support. There's everybody, like there's people that don't have family. But within our culture, it's like we're supposed to be there for each and everybody in the community. And as I was brought up, sorry,
No.
but for as long as I can remember, and I'm grateful for that, my grandparents and my aunties and uncles, Mitsamaki, Enota, they taught us a strong sense of family. Like nobody's perfect. Everybody had their, you know, each and all of us have our bad, you know, we have our odd times where we fall down and that, and no one's perfect. But one thing I am always grateful for them is family. No matter what anybody is going through, you come together as a family in need. And just not last night, the other night, my sister lost her house. And like we're way up here, they're back on the reserve, and I didn't know anything. I was like almost like, well, I wasn't even at home at the time, and I got a phone call saying, like my older sister, they lost their house, they lost everything, and my younger sister called and she was like, where are you? where are you? I need to pick you up. Let's go down. We need to go down. We need to go see Charlene. And I didn't know what was going on till she pulled up and she said that there was, but that's one thing is, as long as everybody got out safe, that's what means the most. And that evening, like when people were calling and that's the first thing is like, as long as everybody made it out safe. There was 2 elders in there. There was like 3, 4 adults, 2 kids, but they all got out safe. And that's the most thing that was most important is everybody got out of there in time. And as a child growing up, I'm very proud to say this, on my dad's side, we've always remained really close. I could remember ever since we were kids, we started out having a family camp out. Every year around September, August long weekend, that was our family camp out. And we'd, ever since we were kids, we'd all meet that one year and everybody looked forward to that. Everybody looked forward to that. Because that was like the kind of like the last shindig before we all have to go back. Hey, we have to, say bye to the cousins. And we grew up camping and everybody looked forward to it. And we'd go, we'd meet in the mountains or at the, on the north end, not the north end, by the Chief Mountain, around that area. We'd timber limits, we'd go there and we'd camp. And that carried on ever since we were kids. And then now I am proud to say I can bring we go there with our kids. And even though now it's kind of a little bit different this past few years after we lost, but after we lost my Auntie Sylvia. And one thing, Sylvia Lohorn, she would always, before we start, we always stand around, in a circle, we all stand around, welcome each other, and we'd smudge, and then they'd have, visit everybody, and then towards the end, when Sunday, Monday nights coming up, we'd all, sit around, by the campfire, and she'd talk about, I know there's you have differences in your family. Everybody doesn't get along and that. But all she'd ask for, and she'd always say, I know, her parents, our grandma and grandpa, Mitsumaki and Anota, when we were younger, they were there. They were at that fire. And she'd always say for all of us, even though we may not see eye to eye with each other, we may not get along, but just for this one time, let's set aside our differences, our anger, our hate. Let's leave them at the entrance. And she'd always remind us this time is a time for our kids, our children, and for the brothers and sisters to get to see each other, spend time with one another. And let's try and keep this going. And to this day, I'm proud to say that it's still going. We're still going, and it's something our children look forward to. And I like telling my daughter that when we were younger, this is what we used to do. This is family. To me, that is family that can come together as one in times of need. That, to me, that is family. And yeah, we all don't see eye to eye. We all don't like certain things each other does, and that gets on our nerves. But in the end, we're family. No matter what, we might not see eye to eye, don't like certain things about each other. But in the end, when family needs one another, you drop everything. You don't judge. It's not good to judge till you know what that person's been through. And that's you drop everything and you go attend to that family. And a couple nights ago, that's what me and my sister did. I just grabbed my purse. I wasn't even prepared. I just grabbed my purse. I just told my daughter I'm going with Marissa down to check on Grandma and Grandpa. And then later on, they followed in case we needed to bring them back home with us. But they were put up in that. So we went to go check on them to make sure they're safe. Just for our sense that they're okay. We had to go see them in person. You had to go hold them and see that they're okay, and to remind them. And that night when we got down there, they were waiting at the multipurpose building. And by the time we got there kind of late, but the other family was there. So it's like tragedies, and like they all bring us together. And that's one thing I'm so grateful for, is that my other brothers and sisters stepped in till we got there, but they also stayed. And that's one thing, like we've always told my nieces and nephews, like, your cousins, those are your brothers and sisters. And it's just like my first cousins, those are my brothers and sisters. Their children are my nieces and nephews. So you have to be there for all of them. For each and every one of them, you welcome them. And you take care of your cousins' children like they were you take them as your own nieces and nephews. And that's one thing my grandparents and my aunties and uncles and my parents, that's one thing we've all tried to keep going in the family, is to help each other out, watch out for each other's kids, guide them, and to be there and to come together as one when needed, and in times of tragedy and in happiness. You want your family there to help you, support you, and to take that experience with you. So I find it's very family, and if you have a strong family, but there's also people out there that don't. They don't have family. They don't have that support. But you're always told to treat everyone with respect, even if they're alcoholics, drug abusers. You don't know how and why they're there, but to accept them, to show them that respect and love, because they are somebody. And we don't know their story as to why they're on the streets or in that state, if they're like into alcohol and drug abuse. We don't, but still, that's someone's baby. That was once someone's child. And for us Indigenous people, it's always been like that. Even though we don't know them, but still help them. As long as you do something kind for them. You don't have to but whatever, just a little act of kindness goes a long way. And material stuff, that's one thing I've always, we were always told it can be replaced. But your act of kindness and what you do to people and how you treat them, that will always stay with that person. When you do something nice or kind for anybody, or to help somebody in need, that will always stay with them. And I feel that's one thing I'm glad that was never taken away from us, is we have a heart, we help people, we're there to help one another. And in trying times, it's good to see people step up. So that's one thing I'm glad that our ancestors and our family, that they've passed down, is that act of kindness and to help one another. And I hope to keep bringing that down to our children. And that's one thing I always tell It's always the way you treat somebody. Even if you don't like their appearance, like the way they smell, that's still somebody. You could give them a clean shirt or do something for them, feed them. That act goes a long way. And I think if we continue to do that and to help each other out and encourage one another, I think there would be reconciliation. It could lead to reconciliation within the reserve and with our white society. I believe it could through education and learning and listening.
Thank you. Oh, well said. You're here.
And I will thank you for that story, because it just made me think too, like if you talk about reconciliation and that beautiful story of your family, imagine if that was reconciliation. So you left hate and annoyance and judgment at the door, and you came, so non-Indigenous society, they came together and you unconditionally helped each other when you needed it and celebrated each other. And if that base concept was how we actually functioned in terms of reconciliation, that learning from that story would be what reconciliation is. That unconditional love and support of each other in all dire, like any kind of situation, but leaving your agenda at the door. And it's always that agenda, I think, that seems to be the bump in the road. So thank you for that story. That really made me think that.
And it's like they always said that. Like my grandma, my grandpa, my aunties and uncles, they'd always say, okay, we're gonna have this thing going on, and she would make her way around. Like she worked in worked on the reserve with counseling and that. So she was pretty she really knew how to approach people, hey? And she'd go around like the ones, especially the kids that, the people that don't see eye to eye, and that there's always people there. And she'd go around and say, okay, and that's one thing I like the way she came about it. It's like this whole weekend, it's for our kids. It's like their last shindig before school, before hitting the books. And we're not here. And she'd tell the older ones, we're not here for ourselves. This is for our children. So that's why she'd ask for, if you guys aren't seeing eye to eye, let's leave our differences at the drive-in. Like when you come into the park, you leave them there. You leave them there. This time is for our kids. So let's leave all the hate, anger, and that all over there. And let's just do this. Let the kids enjoy themselves. Let's have fun and make this a memorable weekend.
See, that's your answer,
Yes.
Christy, to your question.
I know. Like,
Solved.
sorry.
So much work first, though.
I just wanted to go back onto like the families that don't really have, like they don't have that. And I guess my thinking would be that, through residential schools, there was families who were, who had the ability to keep strong family dynamics, who, they got through it and they managed to stay strong. But there is families that went through that just completely lost everything. They don't have any family dynamic. They don't know what family is. They are so deep into their intergenerational trauma that they can't identify what being in a family really is. And I feel like that's it's people that I have worked with, like I look at them and I'm like, you're so lost. You don't know who you are. You don't know where you come from. You just know your history. You just know everything that we're saying now, everything that's negative, like there's nothing, there's no family dinners, there's no family, there's no sense of community, because that has completely been wiped away from them. And I think we want to definitely help those families change their story, and we want to reach back to our traditional ways and take those pieces from family, from Indigenous families that do have that strong concept of family, and bring that to families that have forgotten that, because it is to the point where they don't know what family is. They don't have a concept of family. They don't have a concept of child care or caregiving, and I do try my best to educate and spread awareness to my families, but it's definitely difficult, you know, like years and years of trauma, and trying to shift that and to make yourself, to love yourself is challenging, because I feel like what history has done to us the most, and I believe I read the Orange Shirt Day story, and she said, I always feel, you know, like worthless, and I always feel like I'm not good enough. And even me, I have that, you know, like I've worked so hard. I've, you know, like I do what I can, I give, but I just always have this sense of I'm not good enough. No, you know, like I shouldn't be here. I don't deserve this. And I feel like that really is embedded into Indigenous people from our culture, not our culture, from the history, you know, and we definitely want to help change people and their stories. And we want to, you know, help them to have more, better, positive stories about themselves so they can pass that on to their children.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. Well said. And I think that's that piece of when we talk about these impacts, that it goes back to like, we need to keep having these conversations that impact an entire race here in Canada. Like that doesn't stop. But it's the ignorance, the annoyance, you know, the hatred. That's the stuff that continues. That's the stuff that's going to continue to re-victimize the survivors and the generations after that, right? And hold that place marker for being ashamed of who we are, right? So, you know, as we go through that's the whole crux of this, is as we work with kids or families or communities around us, it's teaching our young people in spaces, creating openings for others to join those positive spaces, that's going to help suppress that and actually honor then the healing of those that have gone through this, or those that are still impacted by our history. Because I mean, it doesn't stop at just the generation that attended. Clearly, we're seeing this being imprinted across as we bring it into the norm, right? And so it is that piece of how do we continue to have those different conversations. I know we're at the 2:00 mark, and I do want to give our panelists a quick break. So those at home, don't go too far. We're going to come back in about 5 minutes. And so thank you so much for your words so far. We'll take a quick 5-minute break. Great. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for, again, tuning in to our second day of Orange Shirt Day with Trellis. Thank you so much to our panelists for a great first part. I do have a question from our audience. And this is going to be a long question. I'm sorry for dropping it on people, but we can definitely play around with it. So thank you, Peter, for bringing in your question. And I might have to summarize the question because it's a bit long here. But in essence, so the question is, what can we do as treaty partner industries or organizations that represent different organizations, including resource extraction companies or businesses, to ensure that the TRC document or UNDRIP and other Indigenous inherent rights to free and prior informed consent are actually enshrined in our Canadian economy? So really what that means is, what does true partnering look like with knowing that we have UNDRIP and other pieces? What does that look like as we bring that into the Canadian economy overall? Anyone have some thoughts? I know it's a big question.
Yes, thanks for that question. Who asked that question?
Peter, good job, Peter.
Peter.
Yes.
So I think there is a concept of OCAP. And so the principles, do people know the principles of OCAP? It's like it's ownership, control, access, and possession is what it stands for. And it's often what's used in academic situations for community research. So when you go into a community and you're like, hey, let's learn about diabetes, the information, because of OCAP principles, that means that the community itself, while say the university does the study, the community itself controls and owns their information. And I think it goes without saying that elders control and own their traditional knowledge. Like, you can't extract it and mine it. So like those principles of OCAP, I don't know why they can't then also be included in a economic base too. Like if you're doing ethical community building or relationship building, to go into any sort of community and mine it, extract it, and not respect the rights and the privileges of the community you're in, doesn't seem like an ethical practice. Now, in terms of economy, how that translates, I guess that translates to supporting Indigenous-led businesses, or making sure contracts. I know often I've also heard of when you do that work, you make sure that there's Indigenous-led activities within that work that you're doing, whether it's the university or an oil thing or whatever. So I think ultimately, perhaps the answer is, is that whenever you go into a community, obviously you have consent and relationships before you do it, but the community is stronger than when you first came. So whether that is whatever that looks like, but if you're talking about economy, whether you're building up young talent, giving resources that weren't there before, I think any business that does go into an Indigenous community should leave that community in a better place to succeed than when they left or when they first came in. That's my, Peter, that's my, off-the-cuff answer. OCAP, learn about it, everybody. As much as there's the United Nations Rights of Indigenous People, which is UNDRIP, and the TRC, you should also know about OCAP.
Thank you, Janet.
The United Nations Rights of Indigenous People.
Yes. No, that's a great point. Oh, I don't know, James, were you on there? No, okay.
He's talking. You can't
James is
hear
on.
him.
1 second, James. We can't quite hear you yet, James.
Sorry, I was just going to add something that Janet had said earlier in the first half of this was one of those first steps really is kind of working on that relationship and building that trust, especially if it's from an economic aspect, right? If you don't have those relationships or the trust with the community where you're operating, you don't go to talk to them only when you want something. You talk to them from the beginning. That's something that I think might help in that area.
Great, thank you, James. And I think that is a true piece. I mean, playing off of your two responses, I mean, as a First Nations person who in our community, we do have a lot of external partners coming into our territory. There is that piece of, while there are relationships and some have been long-term based on the said outcome, there is still that piece of don't taking that that relationship for granted. I mean, even as people move within jobs or retire or whatever that might be, if you won the lottery and you're like, peace out, I don't know, either or, that whole piece of don't assume just because your predecessor has also had that relationship that it automatically bumps to you. That there is that piece of, it is truly a team effort of collective, of building relationships with that community. It's not just about the individual. And I found that is an important piece even from my own community. It's been often like, so-and-so, so-and-so, that's a relationship. And once that is removed, it becomes harder to then rebuild that trust and sense of relationship in order for the ECDEV to continue for the community benefit. And again, it's about the sustainability of said relationship as well, which is really important. Like Janet was saying, it's you want to leave that community in a better place. And while that might be, I think, a thought at the beginning, it's truly having, I think, that during that consultation piece, fully understanding the language that you're both going to be speaking in that relationship. So sitting with many of our elders, again, it's that understanding of what that word means. Like even the word reconciliation, coming from, you pick any language in the world, can mean a very different thing. And so when you're talking about how do you bring in true balance, even in an economical sense, you have to break down some of those words that come into play when you're talking about what does sustainability mean, right? While it's an English language and I can Google it, what that is, and it can interpret what that is, but is that truly what that sense of heart from that community from both sides? What does that mean? What does a better community mean to both sides? And so it's that conversation that is part of that consultation that you need to have that breakdown, even from a very basic piece of, do we truly understand what that relationship is based in? And how is that solidified in a way that is meaningful for both communities? So, I mean, we often talk about, and Janet, you'll recognize this, like signing contracts is one Western construct of agreement, but also then through pipe ceremony will be a different way of contract and mean the same thing from a cultural lens. So are both going in tandem, and do you both understand what that means, that you're entering into the same thing and that it's just as powerful as the other? One doesn't trump the other, they're parallel. And so when we're talking about, again, the earlier question on paralleling traditional parenting or paralleling any system, understanding both worldviews and how they're equal to and complement is important. It's just important as a conversation that you have, right? And so it's those pieces. So yeah, thanks, Janet and James, for adding into that. And thank you, Peter, for asking the question. So I guess on that piece of advice, that role of piece of advice, I'd like to ask my panelists, like, what's one piece of advice that you would give to one that either has children or, maybe they're around children, to help them grow up in an environment of understanding? Like, how do you, we talked earlier about storytelling and being at camp and being together, but how do we help that our children understand one piece of advice that you'd say, like, yes, that's going to help be your change agent? Is there a word that we often tell our young people to be or to do to motivate them to be that change agent? An example might be, I know we have the Igakimat program.
Yes.
And so that piece of advice, that's what most of our people tell our young people, Igakimat, to try hard. For those that don't know what it is, do your best, try hard. It's that piece of, is that the word that we keep instilling in our young people? Igakimat, keep trying hard.
I think that, and building concepts of what to try hard for. So, and maybe even building a concept of family, like belonging, feeling together.
Yeah, I think that sense of reciprocity is.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add, I know you shared something earlier in the day as a non-Indigenous individual, father. The one thing I would pass on to my kids, well, don't be silent. Because if you're silent, you're not part of the solution, right? Like you shared in I think it was at the meeting last night, that some children, it wasn't their generation that caused those events to happen, but that's not really the point of focus. You still can't be silent. If something's not right, you speak up against it. So to my kids, just don't be silent on the issue.
Yeah, and you know, I would just like to add on to that. You know, what I have observed in the Western worldview on parenting, that they encourage parents to talk to their children in a calm voice to allow them to understand the message. The parent is trying to teach. In return, the calm voice of a parent allows the child to respond calmly. The Western ways, if you deny a child sensitive care during the early years of their life, there can be negative consequences for their emotional well-being and will affect their relationship in life. And the same goes for the Blackfoot worldview. We are taught to care for our children in a sensitive and understanding way. We are taught to teach our children with respect and love so that our children can develop strong characteristics that will help them lead a good life and maintain a healthy relationship.
Thank you. It's absolutely a good reminder of the spaces and how we interact with each other is super important. I mean, working with young people and, you know, many of our people on the panel here have kids or have worked with children. The way in which we approach each other is always a way that we need to constantly remind ourselves. We always talk about like kindness. So we're talking about the earlier kindness to others, kindness to those that we don't know. And that comes along with our way of delivery, our tone. And I know everyone, I'm sure, has always had their moment where they're like ready to blow their lid. Your kid, you know, the young person's not listening, and you're like, oh, I'm going to lose my mind. But it's about that sense of, okay, like, let's recheck ourselves and how do I want to come into the situation? Because that will also depend the outcome of how things go along. And so I can appreciate the words. Thank you both for contributing to that, and I appreciate that. And so as we go through, I mean, I love the piece that you said earlier, Rochelle, about the sense of family, and that sense of inclusion of all those around us. And I think that's an important piece, especially when we live here in Calgary, the Mohkinstsis area, that it can be hard for some families. Not everyone has come through their learning of understanding, but knowing that we have to take the kindness to still walk with them where they're at in their journey. It may not happen in this generation. It may happen in a few other generations. I think that's the important piece when we talk about today is like the kinship and the care of all our people. I often get asked the question, or the question comes up sometimes of, at what age is it too young to hear about this truth? Right? And so, honestly, I don't think there's really a set answer for that. I mean, I have a young nephew who, when he was 4, at his day home that he was in, they had learned that there were schools, and that's why they had to wear orange, and that there were schools for Indigenous, you know, Native young kids that got taken away and were put in their equation, and that's as far as it went, into a bad daycare, is the way that the teacher had described it as that. And so they weren't allowed to see families and friends, and they described it. And so at a 4-year-old, he comprehended bad daycare, can't see friends, take you away from family, like, oh my goodness, gonna lose my mind, like, and was right, you know, sat with that through the day and kind of, you know, listening and knowing his own understanding of how he interacts with his friends. He's like, well, they couldn't take their friends interesting. Oh, they couldn't do that because they couldn't do that either. And my sister, obviously we're Indigenous, so at the end of the day, he was all in a hurry to get home to check on my sister to make sure that she was okay and they didn't put her in a bad daycare. And, so he came in the door and was like, oh, good, you're here, like on a big panic. And she's like, yeah, hey, checked in on like, what's going on? And dad was like, came running in the door and busting in. And so they had a conversation about, yes, we're Indigenous. Those bad daycares, they don't operate anymore, but yes, they did do that. So no one's going to come take me to a bad daycare. And he's like, okay, good. Like, if I did, I'd punch them in the face. Like, and, but that sense of that connection piece of, even at the age of 4, that comprehension of a bad daycare resonated with a young person. And so there's often that piece of like, how young is it to have a moment of truth, right? And to me, I mean, that always raises a good question. It's one, in how we deliver that message, because we always don't want to re-traumatize people, but we also want to create that space. So, when we talk about kinship and care, it's how we also helping our young people be those truth tellers as we go through this movement. So again, being that agent of change. We often hear that thing as being an agent of change. So what does that actually look like? And so that also falls part and parcel with like this bigger term of what is reconciliation? Like really, like what is this term mean? Like I could probably go around the room, not just our panelists here, and ask, like, what does reconciliation mean to you? And there might be some similarities, but there might be some very vast differences based on our lived experience, the jobs we're in, the communities that we sit in, our family context and dynamic. But what does that look like? And what does reconciliation, I guess, mean to each of our panelists? And how do you define it? And what is, I guess, a second part, like what is your role in regards to the systems change that we look for? I guess it's a 2-part question. Like, how do each of you define reconciliation? Because it might be different or it might be same, but also then how do you take that definition and how do you use it as a change agent in the work that you do or the communities you sit in? I don't know who wants to start. So what does reconciliation mean to you? Like, when we sit in this, like, what does that actually mean?
I'll start because I can't resist myself. I think I've said it before, but it's making relatives. And so if I have a relative and they're feeling the pain, then I feel their pain. So I think it's that important part of, and then you'd also, well, I guess it depends on what your relatives are like, because I have crazy relatives, but also understanding, like you make the effort to understand their point of view, to like I said, hear opposed to just listen, and to understand that their goals are your goals. So I think maybe reconciliation to me is when someone else, whoever that other person is, their goals is my goal. And I think in terms of my place as a change agent, the advice that I often give to people, or what I've learned myself, is to educate yourself first of all. Like, don't expect Indigenous people to educate you because they're exhausted. They get re-traumatized. Like, how many times, like, do people have to deal with your crap before they could even process their own? So I think that education piece is key. And then when you do educate yourself, everyone has a sphere of influence, whether it's your work. Maybe your work's intimidating you. Then you have your family or you have your friends. And so if you could actually start that piece in a good way with those you can influence, those, because I understand big system change can be intimidating. Oh God, like how do I even understand what the system even is? And then what do I even know what role or power I have within the system? But you are in mini systems and pockets of systems that you can actually influence and change. So I think that would be the key one, is the making of relatives, creating safe spaces for your new relatives to do their work, first of all, at your sacrifice to yourself. And then when you have the ability to stand up and, like they were saying, stand up and make a change, take that opportunity to do so. I think that's how I understand reconciliation.
Thank you. I'd also encourage at home, we have a poll as well. I'd like to have our audience also contribute to the conversation. So what does reconciliation actually mean to you? But also how do you be a change agent in your spaces? So there will be a poll that will pop up shortly. So please contribute to that as well. Does anyone else have a thought around what does reconciliation mean to them? And what does that look like in your sphere of change? Thanks, Janet, for that.
I feel like for me, reconciliation is just not enough. I think the truth is a really, really important piece, but yeah, I don't really have an exact definition of reconciliation because it just does not feel like it's enough for me.
So what would be an interesting term, or where, like, if it's not reconciliation, how would you describe?
Truth and action.
Good, okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
truth and social justice. I feel like reconciliation is just saying sorry. It's like not taking any action. It's just, but we're at the point where we're just building bridges, and that's how many years later. But all our survivors we're losing them. You know, like by the time that we actually have any type of solution, our survivors are going to be gone. Then what are we going to work from? How are we going to honor them when they're in the afterlife, when they suffered here in their physical bodies, you know? How do we honor them right now for going through all that pain? We are honoring them, but it's only one day, you know, like they still have to go out into the world every single day, 364 days, you know, and to me, there's just no action being taken.
I think I might premise that with a follow-up question, Paige, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So like what's trying to balance out that whole piece of build relationships, take time, but also we need action. Are there small tangible things that people could be doing, Indigenous or non-Indigenous, to create that space for the honoring or acknowledgement beyond, I think, the awareness piece that you were saying, like it's knowing and understanding, but what does that, and I know it's going to vary for everybody in terms of action, but what does that look like in terms of that piece? Like, are there tangible things that we can be doing to move that along? So I was reading an article this week that I think it was like 6 or 8 of the calls to action have only truly been really looked at in terms of full information, and people were saying like that's not fast enough. But at the same time, how do we balance that with ensuring the intention is right and that it's actually done through protocol and properness versus expedition, right?
So Indigenous culture and ways of knowing is built solely on relationships. That's a very big piece of being Indigenous is relationships. Your relationship around you and your community, your relationship with your family, your relationship with the land, your relationship with your ancestors, and most importantly, your relationship with yourself. You know, like how are you able to have a relationship with other people if you can't have a relationship with yourself? So I feel like the tangible piece would be, you know, the physical part, but you know, like everything contributes to our physical being, and it can't really be thought of as, you know, the physical part because there's so much to it. We need to help rebuild those relationships in people who have lost it so they can build relationships in other people around them. They're not going to be able to build relationships with people if they're sick or if they're broken or if they have the wrong perspective, you know, and I think it's about definitely just changing those relationships and valuing them, bringing them back and helping people to understand how important they are. I always think about this story I was told back in school. There was a question about, you know, if traditionally was someone punished for doing someone bad in a tribe, and what the elder had said was traditionally they would be taken and they would be put outside the tribe. They were not allowed to come back in if they did something, you know, that was looked down upon. So nobody did anything because they knew they could not survive alone. Surviving alone, the concept of being alone is you're alone. You don't have any relationships. You don't have any connection. You don't really know how to move forward. You don't really, you have no guidance. So, and I think like when I think back to all of this conversation, you know, for me, I went through the system. I've been on income support. I've been in shelters. Like it didn't help me having workers come into my life as a worker. What helped me was mentors. And I really think about that a lot is mentors. And I feel like we don't need to come in as workers trying to fix something. We need to come in as mentors. Like I'm teaching, you know, like, and helping people to construct their stories in positive ways, listening to their stories, listening to their truths, but helping to change their perspectives with their stories, because stories change perspectives, and that's why they're so important.
Thank you for that. That's such a great piece when you said the being alone from the tribe or the community. And that made me sit with a lot of the other comments that were made today. Like, really, many of our people are still alone.
Yeah.
Hence why they may be on the street. They might be, in other places that they are alone from their tribe. And that disassociation from the sense of community, that's really what the disruption came about. And that's where we've left them. And so it's how are we creating spaces in all of our workplaces to reintegrate people into a sense of a community or a tribe or a home place, and creating that space of kindness and bringing them back into it. Because they might have been so removed for so long, it's perhaps a foreign space for them to be in. And that's okay, right? I mean, you think, I said earlier that I'm a first generation survivor of residential school. So my father went to the Kamloops residential school. And that sense of disconnect. So while still being very proud of who he is as an Indigenous man and where we come from, that sense of that disruption from residential school did create that sense of disconnect from the community, even though we went back every year with our great-grandparents that's who he was raised by, like still that sense of disconnect was always there. And so it's being kind and gentle in how we bring them back in, whether it was into home territory or in other sense of communities that we had in places that we were living. And so that really did hit a great point of that sense of just a good reminder that many of us are still alone and or just on the fringe of where we need to be. And so it's how do we create those spaces of inclusivity to welcome people back into the tribe? And I think that goes back to earlier when I posed the question, like what does reconciliation look like and how can we be doing that? I mean, I think a lot of that, when we look at disruption, culture has played a big disruption. So our access to culture for many of our young people, and even from people as we're spread out all over the place, that disconnect from our sense of culture and cultural practice is important. So Janet, you did talk earlier about culture camp and the importance of what that looks like. Rochelle, you talked about your family coming together on the land, that sense of community and that sense of connection. I know a big thing that's often sitting with the team at Trellis, and we have conversation with how we bring our young people into space and doing things around cultural connection, even around medicine picking. So we all know sage around here, it's already gone to seed, but the last number of months has been around sage picking. But it's, again, that access, right, is a huge thing. When we look at some of the, the tangible things that we've been doing as systems together, one of the big things we're talking about as a team of saying, okay, like, yes, many of us go up to Nose Hill to provide teachings to our young people, but again, knowing that a lot of our teachings, we don't want to extract too much and harm the environment, but two, also be cautious of pesticides and other things being sprayed. Three, also not wanting to overpick in areas and be concerned about that piece. So, I mean, for many people, and let's be honest, many of our Indigenous people across Turtle Island live in urban centers. And so it's the access to our traditional medicines and those pieces that there's barriers to that. And so, as we look at reconciliation, how do we take pieces of reconciliation that are tangible of saying, Indigenous people need access to their culture. Indigenous people need access to medicines, which come from land. Right now, we live in urban centers, and that's not as feasible. So how do we then partner with those who have land and accessibility to create that space of inclusion and access for our community? So, I mean, it doesn't always have to be about, I think, a business sense, but it's about supporting people's sense of culture, and that cultural connection is super important around that piece. But that's just one tangible thing I can think of. Like land access to medicines is vitally important as we talk about healing, reconciliation, understanding culture, that as we grow as a city and we expand outwards, that also impacts the medicines that are around us, right? And so as we look longer term, are there people out there who are willing to step up and step into those places of saying, absolutely, I have land, feel free to come out, and we will gladly share our culture with you. But when we look at access to things that might not seem that, I think, impactful. It actually is when we're talking about access to medicine. It's actually part of the practice of culture, right? And so when we look at reconciliation, there are tangible things that I think we can be taking as a society to do that. And so, thank you for sharing your pieces on what we could be doing on reconciliation. And I don't know if others on the panel have some actions or things where they define reconciliation and what that could look like as a systems change.
Yeah. Well, I just want to add this into listening to everybody talk. I think for me, I think reconciliation is a lengthy process. That's just, but it is important process. And I think it is our responsibility as a society to work towards seeking harmony with each other. But I think that before we can achieve harmony, we must accept each other for who we are and what we offer to the world. I think in order for us to achieve reconciliation, we must first listen to Indigenous people, truth about their experiences of residential school, learn about the truth of Canada's history, educate ourselves, and learn that we are all in this together. This is all our history. We are all connected, and until we all work together, listen to one another, that's when we can truly reconcile.
Thank you, Jackie. That's so important. I think absolutely going to reconciliation, that piece. And I think that speaks into, I got high tech now, I got a laptop, watch out. So I have some great questions, I think, that follow up on Jackie, your point, and a couple other points on here. So there's some really great things in here of saying, so one, I got a question from Shane here. So asking the question of how can an organization or service that supports issues affecting our Indigenous community at a disproportionate rate ensure that they are culturally competent to support Indigenous people in a meaningful way beyond awareness training?
Yeah.
So that's a great question. I don't know if anyone wants to take a stab at that.
More awareness training. No, just kidding.
I think Shane, I might throw something out here to help the committee. I think part of being within and I don't know if your organization's, it sounds, I'm going to assume that it's going to be a Western construct system, so a non-Indigenous organization. So I would encourage yourself and your organization to look a little bit deeper beyond awareness training. Really take a look at how you're building those relationships, how you're embedding that in your daily practice of how you include, earlier it was said around business procurement, your policies. So really taking a deeper dive at your policies and how those are articulated or worded. I don't know why as an English language we love to throw out big words and use big giant things, but really taking a look at your policies and how that actually supports the environment that you want to create in your workplace. So the sense of inclusion, diversity, how you even onboard your Indigenous staff in your organization is really important. And so sitting down with your HR department and really saying like, okay, besides us doing tick boxes and saying like, are you an Indigenous person or do you self-identify as an Indigenous person? And oh great, we have an Indigenous committee, yay. It's like, okay, like, but how is that voice of that Indigenous committee actually being fed up to a top sense of leadership? Or is that being integrated? Is that only for doing one-off things to your business, like for like Indigenous Peoples Day or for Orange Shirt Day? Like, how is that being utilized and constructed in your business that brings the voice of Indigenous clients or those that work with you to the top and being parallel to what you would consider just as valid from your board or your leadership? Those two need to be parallel, and how you're using that information needs to be very clearly communicated with your with your community on how you're obtaining that information and how do you utilize that. So I don't know, I just say going, like really diving deep into deconstructing this premise of a Western structure within a business.
Is that just for employees or clients as well?
Right now it's saying like how do they as an agency really build in more of a cultural component to supporting their Indigenous clients and participants in a meaningful way beyond awareness. Like how do they really get their staff and their colleagues in a place to support our Indigenous people?
I was thinking of Indigenous like members of the agency, but I think, then I have to rethink this.
Okay, good time. We'll come back to that.
I know a lot of the things that we do is to try and walk our talk. So, for example, one thing that we did, we have an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding with Siksika Nation. And so we try to then incorporate like some Blackfoot like processes into how we do things. So we commissioned an honor song. I think your honor song was by, Christy and I both have, by Spike has your, right. So like Spike Eagle Speaker Jr., he has the rights to make a song, and so we commissioned a song by him, and he now holds our song. So anytime we do something significant, we make sure we have resources in place and a time, and we talk to Spike, and Spike comes and sings our honor song. So there's these things too where you do these, you know, it's looking at the big picture too. So we have an honor song, yay, us, right? But then you also need the resources, and the board understands, oh yeah, you have an honor song, so we have to have a budget to bring Spike in to respect that, to have him sing that, and the resources in place to do that, and then understand when do you sing your honor song and who should sing your honor song. So that becomes like cultural awareness with the board, but at a deeper level, because they're standing there when this song is being sung and they need to understand what it's about. So I think there's actually we also do like smudging in meetings as a like majority of a non-Indigenous team. We still do smudging. We tell coop stories now, and like there's all these practices that you can do that are technical, as the elders would say, like technical things. Like I would never do traditional sacred teachings or anything like that. But there are technical things that we do as a team in an everyday meeting all the time. So it's just not when there's an Indigenous person in the room, do we then bring out the smudge. So it's one of those foundational practices that we employ. And I'm also noticing too, and I'm sure a lot of people, like Christy could speak to it, like there's always one person who you always go to with the Indigenous stuff. And then it gets exhausting. And you're like, oh my gosh, honest, look it up, or come to a solution and then ask me. You're killing me here. So, but what I'm finding is that like people in my staff now go, hey Janet, we should do this stuff for National Indigenous Day. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. You do it. And off they go. And so they might come and check in and say, is this appropriate? Can we do this thing? But now things are actually coming up from the staff, and they're checking in with me, opposed to assuming I'm not even Indigenous, for crying out loud, that I should be the one person in the organization who knows how to do it. I think that is also key. So there's that awareness training part, which is so superficial, but then there's educating people who could do the work on the ground, and it's not always that one poor like Indigenous staff person who's exhausted. Or a non-Indigenous person who's the ally that's exhausted. So I think that's also key.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, good job.
I'm gonna like. I was originally gonna answer like when it came to Indigenous employees, but I feel like they're very interrelated because I think, you know, I'm gonna go with equity because as an Indigenous employee, I feel like I face a lot more adversity on in my daily life, you know, versus a non-Indigenous, and that's just an assumption. So, like, you know, I'm working during the day with my families, and I'm seeing them face these extreme adversities, and then I'm coming home and I'm seeing friends and family who just may be facing extreme adversities as well, and you know, so I'm working not only during the day but at night, and I think like it's about creating a better understanding that as Indigenous people, we do face a lot more adversities, and that there are definitely, if you come into a traditional setting, that there are protocols and like just approaching the right person for those protocols and honoring our elders. And I think that they can really bring our elders into these agencies to help make decisions on things like this, like where if it's just having the proper protocol for the agency or how to letting them be a part of that, like even just with an opening prayer and creating that space, allowing them to tell a story in that space to change a perspective, and yeah, just building the relationships, because I feel like there definitely just needs to be more understanding of the adversities that we face on a daily basis. And I think right now within a lot of Indigenous communities, we're losing people at very high rates. So especially within the last, within COVID, we've lost a very, very high amount of people. And we have this sense of community with our losses. We come together through our losses, but we don't know how to come together with a strong sense of positive community, and I think we need to definitely be looking at the amount of losses that Indigenous people are experiencing, because it affects each and every one of us. We do have a sense of community because we all know each other. We've grown up with each other. We are a family. We're related. I'm sure if me and her have a conversation, we will know some people. Like it's that's how it is. If we lose one person, we all feel the effects of that, and it hurts us. When I hear of somebody losing an Indigenous person in another Indigenous community, it hurts me, especially of how it happened. So I think that the trauma and the grief and the loss that is affecting our people really needs to be taken into account at this time.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. I have another great question from Anonymous. Don't be anonymous. It says, as an immigrant, how do I include myself in the process of truth and reconciliation? And is my contribution important?
100. 100, it is so important. I think both processes, my process and a process of, I say newcomer, I don't know what the term is, like a newcomer and an Indigenous person building bridges, because there's so many different negative perspectives about both of us. And I've actually sat with a client, and she explained to me how there's these negative perceptions of her religion. And I was like, I go through the exact same thing. I have negative perceptions of me as an Indigenous person, but us sitting together and having this conversation is breaking down those barriers. I told her about my culture, and she told me about hers. And, like there's actually some similarities that we found within our different cultures of giving. They give, and I'll say it's Muslim. So the negative perspective of Muslim and terrorism and, like just being savage or being violent. And, when two of our spiritualities, our life, our ontological responsibility is giving, a piece of us is giving. So like there really is no violent peace. The term savage is actually, it comes from colonization. So I think definitely, and I welcome all newcomers to Blackfoot territory all the time. And, like I love to learn about, the new cultures and the new traditions. And I think that's important for each and every one of us.
Yeah. All right. I got one. I know we have like about 5 minutes left, but I have a really interesting question. It's kind of a fun one, actually. So it's on social media, and I'm not on half of this stuff. But okay, platforms like TikTok and Instagram have introduced me as a non-Indigenous person to many Indigenous people who are sharing their culture and stories. Do you feel like these are a positive way to share? And do you feel that they capture these stories in a casual form, in a way of preserving them as well?
Yes.
I believe so. I think so, because in our culture, and that a way of communicating is through storytelling and through like joking around. Like when you do a mistake or something happens, you learn from your mistake. And also, like our elders and that, it's always through like laughter, poking fun at you, sorry. Poking fun at you, making like when you do something, it always comes back to you. It always comes back to you. They always, with them, they use their, like our elders and that, they always go through storytelling and laughing and joking around to make send their point across to you. That's how. And like when you speak to somebody or when you're trying to ask or inquire about certain things, like say our language, and like I can understand it. I can understand it like when two elders are talking, I know what they're talking about. I can understand what they're saying. I can speak it to a certain extent. But when you don't know something and you confront an elder and say, okay, I need to know, how do you say this? Or how, and they just be looking at you and they'll tell you, okay, how do you say it? How do you think you say it? That's something like my uncles and that, they'd always say that. Like, how do you, and then you tell them. And then they just look at, and then like after you try to pronounce it or say it, the way they stare at you, and they say, oh, you've been gone from the reserve too long. But it's always through humor. I find that's a big thing. It's always through humor that they teach. So I think that's a good thing still.
I really love that you say that because sorry.
No, you go ahead, Paige.
Okay, thanks. Growing up, I was originally going to go into drama and like media, and because it really bugged me that every single like thing about being Indigenous was so negative and so sad, and I'm like, where's the humor in all this? Like, yeah, there is really sad situations, but like we are very, very, like, we're funny people. Like we laugh and we joke around, like even, like, and I think TikTok and social media is really bringing that humor to light. Like I've heard this before, but I truly believe that our humor has helped us survive colonization, and our humor has gotten us through those really tough times. So like it's an important piece of who we are. We laugh, we joke, like during our worst times, we joke about that too. Like, so it's like there's a piece of us that's showing that has never been brought to light before, and that makes me really happy.
Thank you. James.
Yeah, Christy, I was just gonna, I'm not on TikTok. And what I was gonna share is, she goes on TikTok and she watches videos. She actually found a really amazing recipe for red. And if she didn't find that learning platform, we never would have had the joy of actually tasting it. So when the viewer brought up the question about TikTok and social media, I think it's just another platform that we need to look at considering to share those stories, share that knowledge so that folks can learn. We can't just think, we can't rely on the schools, just the schools or the education system. As parents, we can't just rely on ourselves or our friends to help. So I think if there's other ways that we can share the stories, share the knowledge so that folks can learn, folks who are on TikTok or more in tune with the digital aspect, I think, we should leverage any tool we can.
I agree. James, I think you and I, probably two people on the planet, are probably not on TikTok, so.
Me neither. Me neither.
Okay, good, there's three of us. Yes. Okay, good. Oh, good, we're having a whole little community here of non-TikTokers. Good. Thank you so much, everyone. I know we've come to our time. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in, the audience. Thank you so much to everyone. James, Jackie, Rochelle, Paige, Janet, thank you for sharing your words. Thank you for sharing your insight into some of these questions. Thank you to those who tuned in and provided some questions into the conversation. I want to thank our sponsors again for this year's event. I want to thank our 2021 Orange Shirt Day Planning Committee, all my staff, my colleagues, you all know who you are. Thank you very much from the deep bottom of my heart for being such great allies. And thank you so much for spending some time with us this afternoon. Hopefully you get to go out and do some more learning. There's lots of things happening here in Calgary right now. So make sure you tune to that. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next year. Have a fantastic day.